Hello, Olive Branch Church, and anyone else that may be joining us for this video. I'm Pastor Wesley, and I wanted to share with you a condensed version of this past Sunday's message. We've been going through a series on spiritual disciplines, practices that we can do to grow in spiritual maturity. And the series is entitled Holy Habits. Now, the first holy habits that we talked about were inward disciplines. These were meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. And they are inward disciplines because they're between us and God. They deal with our heart and our minds and really are not seen necessarily by those around us. Now, the outward disciplines are ones where they have an effect that others can see. Now, they do have an inward reality that leads to the outward expression, but we call them outward disciplines because the result is an outward change that others can see. Now, before we get into the first outward discipline, which is simplicity, I just have one announcement that I'd like to share with you or talk to you about. And I mentioned it last week. This coming Sunday at church on the 25th of October, we are going to have our first communion since returning from all the COVID shutdowns and the break from church that we had earlier this year. Now, we are going to use the little prepackaged, factory-sealed communion elements, which means that no one really handles these beforehand, and they will be already in the pews when you arrive at church. So we hope that you can join us this Sunday for communion. If not, I am planning on calling as many of you as I can to see if you'd like for me to bring some of these little prepackaged communions to you and actually offer you communion in your home. If you don't hear from me or don't hear from me as soon as you'd like, feel free to give me a call. So let's get into today's spiritual discipline of simplicity. Now, simplicity is a spiritual discipline that actually brings us joy and freedom and balance. And it removes things like anxiety and fear. Simplicity is an interesting characteristic because it does heavily relate to or deal with money. You know, one of our favorite topics in church, right? But Jesus was not ambiguous about finances. In fact, the one topic he talked about the most, or that was involved in most of what he said, was finances. He talked about money more than anything else. It was often in connection with spiritual issues or someone's spiritual condition or their salvation. Now, possessions or the pursuit of them is probably the single greatest danger or threat to our pursuit of Christ. And that's why the discipline of simplicity is an important one. Now, if there's something that controls us more than Christ, then it needs to be taken down a notch or two or three or however many we need in order to put Christ as the first thing in our life, the main thing that dictates what we say and do and how we live. Now, our focus this past Sunday was that the simple life or the simplistic life is the one that relies on God for all we need and where we share what he has given to us. So it's about relying on God for all that we need and then knowing that all that he has given to us is for us to share with others. So let's briefly look at the question, what is simplicity? It is, as I said, an inward discipline that results in an outward lifestyle or an outward expression. And it is an outward expression or an outward discipline because others see the results. Now, this is actually one of the downfalls or maybe the traps that we could fall into as we try to practice simplicity, is that we might try to appear to be simplistic, that we may try to do the outward things so that other people will think that we have been changed inwardly. And so as we go through simplicity and as you begin to practice it in your life, I encourage you to make sure that you have a change of heart that leads to the outward expression, and then we're not just going through the motions and being a hypocritical Christian. Now, as you look at simplicity, let's look at those two things, that the inward reality and the outward expression. Now, for the inward reality, we're going to look at a handful of verses. We looked at quite a few more this past Sunday, but I'll just highlight some of the main ones. In Leviticus 25, verse 23, it says, "The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers." Now, this verse was written in reference to the Jubilee, where during the year of Jubilee, all property would return to its original owners. But the point here is that everything that we have belongs to God. And so if we are focused on collecting, gathering, hoarding, keeping everything that we have, then we're not using it the way that God wants us to. That we're not using his provision for us as he intended, but we're also not using it to minister to others as he has hoped that we would. Luke 6:30 says, "Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back." Now, God has given us, as I said, everything that we have so that we can help others. When someone's in need, do not give them alone. Just give. One of the most generous couples that I knew was a retired couple from a church that I was a youth pastor at. And he told me, not to be boastful or anything, but just to be generous, he said, if you ever need money or anything, he says, let me know. I'll just give it to you. He says, a few $100s isn't going to make a difference to me. He goes, and I've never asked for it back, because the worry of trying to remember who I loaned money out to and who owes me what is just too much stress, and there's so much freedom in just giving. We put ourselves through so much worry by trying to remember what we loaned out, what people owe us, who borrowed that tool from our garage and that we haven't seen in months. But if we just let it go, then we won't worry about it. Also in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, it says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." Now, there's a lot in this verse that we could unpack, and there's one thing I want to focus on primarily, but I do want to mention one other thing. Being a Christian or a believer, and even having the quality of being simplistic, doesn't mean that we can't have wealth, because as the verse says, those that are rich should continue to trust in God. Now, the thing that I really wanted to point out to you is that at the end of that verse, it says, "Put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." Now, I know, and I've always believed that God will provide my every need. But here it says he provides everything for our enjoyment. The practice of simplicity is not an attempt at a joyless life. The simplicity does not mean that we get rid of all the pleasurable things or fun things in our life and that things have to be boring. It simply means that we get rid of the control that those things have over us. It's actually a freeing discipline. It frees us, so we're no longer a slave to those things. Have you ever been the planner or the point person on a big celebration like a wedding or maybe a really big project, and you have to make sure everything is lined up, make sure that everything works, and the day of the celebration, or if it's a presentation at work, that you're the one that has to have everything together, and you really can't enjoy the celebration or enjoy the benefits of all the work that has been done. It would be so much nicer or better if somebody else could do all that and we could simply enjoy the benefits. Well, that's exactly what God does through the discipline of simplicity. God has a plan for us, and he's been working on this plan for all eternity. So let's sit back and enjoy what God has planned, that we can enjoy what he's provided, and we can use what he's provided and share it with others. Now, we've talked about the inward reality of simplicity, but we also need to talk about the outward expression. And this is where kind of the practical application comes from. This is what other people will see. Now, these are things that we could practice or that we can do to help us learn simplicity. But again, we must remember that it has to do with a change of our heart. So just doing these isn't going to cause us to be simplistic, but this may help us learn to have that attitude of the heart of simplicity. So there are several suggestions, and I'll hit most of those in this video. The first one suggestion is to buy things for their usefulness rather than for their status. Buy cars for their practicality, not their prestige. Buy a home for livability, not their impressibility. I've heard of individuals that buy houses in these really nice neighborhoods and really expensive houses and really nice on the outside. They even have the really nice car in the driveway. But if you go into their home, you'll notice that it's basically empty. I've even heard of stories where someone has gone into a home like this and seen lawn furniture in the living room because they've invested everything they have into an appearance that they're wealthy. They're so focused on what others think and appearing to have wealth that they are really truly broke. The second one is to reject anything that is producing an addiction in you. Now, when we think of addictions, we don't often think of possessions or things, but if you have a need that isn't food, water, or shelter, then you may need to regain control over it. And one of the best ways to do that, as we'll talk in a moment, is to give it away. If you can't give something up, then it controls you. Now, while we have tons of stuff that just needs to go, and we need to let this go, not because it's there and it's cluttered, but because we have an attachment to that, and we need to let this go. The third thing, very closely related, is to develop a habit of giving things away. This doesn't only apply to the massive items that we have in our garage, our attic, our basement, our barn, our storage unit, or our closets. Although we should get rid of anything that we have no use for. But are there things that are useful that we don't necessarily need, that we don't have to own? Having these things really just connects us to them. If we have something and it breaks or it needs repaired or replaced, then we have to invest time and finances back into that. So the more we have, the more invested we are in things. Another suggestion is to obey Jesus' instructions about plain, honest speech. Now, simplicity isn't just about things, as I've said, but in Matthew 5:37 it says in the New King James, "But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." Now, if you agree to do something, then do it. Don't, or I should say, avoid flattery and half-truths. Don't change your mind often. Make a decision and stick to it. You see, as Christians, we are to be led by God in all that we do. And if we're constantly changing our mind, then we must not be led or guided by God. Simplicity in this way is because we are focused not on our emotions or feelings that come and go, or by any influences of the outside world or what other people think, but we're influenced by one thing, which is God's desire. It's simplistic because we don't have all these different things pulling us all these different directions, but we just have one person pulling us in the one direction. Now, last suggestion is that we should shun anything that distracts us from seeking God first, seeking His kingdom first. It's easy to lose focus on God's kingdom, even for good things. I think that it's wise and honorable to provide for your family, to find a job that financially provides for you, maybe even provides good health benefits and other things that are good to have as you raise a family. But I know that some people can get so focused on that they work so hard and they focus so much on the paycheck or the overtime that they neglect their family, that they don't spend time with their kids or their wife. They don't build relationships with them or take time to teach them. As we seek to provide for our family, we must remember that it's not just financial provision. We need to provide spiritual leadership. We need to provide relationship and discipline and direction for our children especially. Now, of course, I'm not advocating that we give up providing for our family, but that we give up the obsession of it, that we don't work so hard that we actually neglect our family. One thing I've learned over the years being in ministry is that The best way that I can provide for my family is not through a paycheck, but it's through doing what God wants me to do. If I am where God wants me to be, then He is going to provide graciously and abundantly. And so I want to encourage you to do the same, to seek God and not be distracted by other things or voices or status or position or anything else. So I'll be praying for you this week. I hope that you can join us some Sunday again soon. And until then, God bless you and have a fantastic day. Thank you.